So it's a very special moment for me to address people in Sloven English. So I hope you will understand it anyway. I've done about 100 concert tours worldwide, and in 35 years of being conductor, probably thousands of concerts. But usually I'm turning that away only when I do things like speak Sudhir. So it's a very special experience for me to speak in English to general audience.
Rezes parfois, rezes parfois quoi, rezes parfois un mon pourquoi, rezes parfois c'est de mon pourquoi, rezes parfois dans qui stège, c'est de mon pourquoi, rezes parfois j'entends qui stège, c'est de mon pourquoi, rezes parfois envie, j'entends qui stège, c'est de mon pourquoi, rezes parfois. Fois par envie, j'entends qui stège, c'est de mon pourquoi, rezes parfois soi. Fois par envie, j'entends qui stège, c'est de mon pourquoi, rezes parfois oui. De soi, fois par envie, j'entends qui stège, c'est de mon pourquoi, rezes parfois.
That's me with different haircut. Well, I'm very happy and very honored to be here at the Harvard, and I really am. I'm flying here somehow from different perspectives. How beautiful work I can do here in good circumstances. Sometimes I fly with my kick scooter. You know what I mean. But basically, what I'm doing here is developing few things. As Meredith mentioned, I'm developing music theater project based on some things which I'm going to tell you later. It is called Baba. I'm also writing a book about Choregia concept and method, and I'll also develop some other projects such as Stabat Mater, which is inspired with Mary of Incarnation and her letters to the Sun. I mean, I do more projects simultaneously because that's the way how I work. But to give you some ideas what this choregia actually means, I would like to share with you few previous productions to understand how this new music theater actually is developed. So, choregia is a name which somehow comes from old Greek tragedies, and chorex are supposed to be patrons. And new music, which is always together with choregia, new music theater, refers to new music which I usually perform, and it's mostly music of our time, contemporary music, but sometimes new music is also something which is rarely or maybe even never heard on our concert stages, such as medieval music, or maybe ethnical music, or music which was taken for some different contexts, such as sociological, or I don't know, maybe music by women in monasteries, or anything like that, which are not usually at the concert programs. So the theater nowadays is still very much perceived only as drama theater. So while Indian theater, Kathakali, or maybe Japanese theater, No, for example, are structured from dance, music, choral singing, stylized rituals, and text. The main characteristic of Western theater is that content is illustrated by drama acting. But when people talk about music theater, we automatically think of opera, operette, or musical, or music comedy. So with years of working with Carmina Slovenica and Kabatola, these are my two ensembles, I developed new concept of music theater, which is sometimes also called vocal theater or theater of voices. What is choregia nowadays? It represents two fields: concept of principles how to create music theater projects and specific method of working with ensembles, choirs, orchestras, actors, conductors. So for idea about Choregia, I would like to share with you one clip now. It is one of my earliest work named From Time Immemorial, which was performed for a change with opera chorus and opera orchestra and opera soloists, which is quite a rare occasion for music theater pieces because, as you know, opera houses tend to keep their museums with Verdi and Puccini, and contemporary music is only sometimes on repertoire just to be, you know, big. So please, From Time Immemorial. Okay, so Choregia is composed of elements that do not illustrate or double each other. So they somehow preserve their own identity and do not rely on convention or hierarchy of elements in theater. I can explain this like that. If you have a dish, like piece of meat maybe, and this is music, and you can put some side dishes as a garnish, a little bit of vegetables, that means light, a little bit of potato costumes. That's the way how very often music theater projects are conceived. So we have like a major thing, or maybe in drama you have text and then you add movement or whatever. But for Choregia, it's important that all elements are equal, so we don't have a main dish and side dishes. In music, the score is in direct control of the musician. So the reception of the execution of a music piece depends only on musician initiatives. But this doesn't apply for music in Choregia projects because this music requires from musician and the audience a completely different experience, namely the intensive radiation of heard, music or word, is complemented with culture of the scene, the culture of the eye, the feeling of external form. So music becomes interesting in a different way as it gets these references in non-musical world. Why I'm telling this? Because this music was not composed to be performed in opera or to be performed as a staged music. It's concert music, which is staged. That's why this adding of other elements gives the music different dimension. Another thing which is interesting for Choregia is that performers are a little bit different than we used to have them in opera. They used to use different vocal techniques, not only bel canto, also ethnical, extended vocal techniques. Musicians can be different. Another aspect for Choregia is that we perform it not only in opera houses and concert halls, but also in industrial halls, in monasteries, in completely different sociological environments. I think for me, Koregia is a really, really good field and place for exploration, and it's a playground for researching new music and new theater expressions. So I would like to make clear, Koregia or new music theater is not opera, is not musical, and is not operette. So how all this started? I was conductor of Carmina Slovenica ensemble and some others for, as Meredith already mentioned, for many years. We did a lot of competitions, concert tours, and I started to add some other elements to my performances. And I actually start to use movement as a first element, because in ethnical music, in folklore music, movement and singing and instruments are so naturally connected. And it was the first contact with me, how to change this classical formation of choirs who were always kind of relicts of past, who stand in 4 rows, into something more communicative. So first thing was ethnical music and movement, and second thing was, of course, Greek tragedy and the role of choir in Greek tragedy, where chorus was about 20 to 50 people, of 20 people performers. They sing, they recite, they move. So they were part of the performance, who make comments, who was a mirror to the audience. And above all, they serve as one entity. It was not a group of many people, but they become one personality. So they were my 2 first inspiration. And first one of the first such projects where movement was incorporated into music, which is kind of ethnical or new age ethnical, was Adiemos, which we can see a little bit of it. Because it's very old recording, but I would like to add that this orchestra behind is international orchestra, consists of only female young girls from entire region in Central Europe, because I was very much inspired with Ospedali Veneziani. I don't know if you're familiar with this, that in old Venice there were charitable institutions where they have female orchestras, girls orchestras, and girls choirs who were there, who were abandoned children, those who don't have parents, orphans. So I was inspired with this. That's why we actually established this formation. Another very important thing in my work is collective experience, because it seems that these crowds carry in themselves a power and characteristics which by far exceed the mere sum of psychological and physical characteristics of individuals in it. As you can see, I always work with big groups. But the voice of the collective we really like best is the voice of choir, because choir is the only bigger group activity that is not driven by any ideology or economical, political, military, or religion reasons. So choir is really a special formation of human activity. And I'm very fascinated about one voice who become part of this body of other voices, or all these bodies together which become one body and one entity only. So choir has a very special role and special power. Of course, it's also very difficult to work with the choir because there are so many different characters and you really have to work a lot on team building. But at the end, when you manage to establish an ensemble which is really strong organism, then it really speaks very loud. So I would like to share with you Rauha, just for an impression of power of collective. I would just like to add that there are singing without being conducted. That's the very, very, very special thing, to have 50 people being so tuned emotionally and musically that they can perform this complex music without being conducted.
Kolmas severin punasta, selles malmi ilmatunut, selles malmi ilmatunut. Oisinta rottereska, rekka kulja, ei sisistä sormi ollut, ei sorri, kuissa sä saa solkuteli, vedellä sä väsyteli. Oisinta rottereska.
Thank you. And the third very important thing is, of course, voice, because voice is always center of my exploration, and voice in the performance is impersonated and really becomes a very important manifestation. Actually, for me, it becomes personality or more personalities. So I think that voice have a special power to link to some specter of emotions which we are not even aware that we carry in us. some psychoanalytical language is established where voices make these soundscapes and control the stage. But to understand voice better, of course, you need to research it, to make a voice laboratorium, to really work on every aspect of voice, not only of beauty of the voice, like bel canto is, but also extended vocal techniques to learn how other cultures use voice, from Eskimos to Balkan. So there are different ways how you place your voice, but not only how to sing, but also how to scream, cry, and all kinds of uses of voice. That's a really big laboratorium which never ends. Maybe we can see Pra Sonata, just a little bit, how we actually how we orchestrate sound poetry as a concept. So that was example of sound poetry, actually. So how Choregia projects are conceived, about process a little bit. The creation of making these scores brings musical notion of composing to the all aspects, how we conceive the piece, how we perform it, of course, and stage it. So in Choregia, one meta composition is created by positioning different music, text, drama, and all kinds of visual elements into one bigger composition. So treatment of all these voice, text, movement, light, image, sound, gesture, and all these elements of theatrical production is based on musical principles and compositional techniques. That means that musical thinking actually applies to the performance as a whole, not only to music, as somebody would think. That's why relations between elements is, let's say, musical vocabulary, polyphonic, imitation, monophonic, homophonic, polyrhythmic, polytonal. So this musical thinking is part of the process. Somehow I can say that Choregia is performance in no man's world, because it's not the world of music or world of drama or dance. It's kind of adventure, scenic adventure. Sometimes musicians ask me if music is not enough. Why do we stage it? We don't stage any music. When I get a score or musical idea, I start to think simultaneously, visual things, whatever is part of the project. And if other elements are organically here, then I go for Choregia project. If they are not here, we do a concert, classical concert in a hall, beautifully dressed, normal thing. But contemporary music, early music, they are very inspirative for other elements to be part of the production. So I think that music becomes interesting in other ways when it gets these references in non-musical world. So inside this field when music and non-music meets, then some different dialogue starts. And because music and non-music, they have different meanings, and coexistence somehow brings new third meaning, which is actually what I'm interested in. But Choregia project, they doesn't bring story in classical sense. So there is no dominant story as we are used to have it in opera, operette, and musical. Of course, there is some theme which was inspiration, but we don't have this classical protagonist as we have it in opera, and there is no drama between two protagonists. Nobody is killing and nobody is dying, to say so. So there is no dramatic, is not, we don't get this dramatic from classical acting, but from the way how music and other elements are performed and how they are understood. That's this dramatic element, not the story and relationships. And we don't really have some major protagonist who get all attention of the audience, what is going to do. Usually, the main protagonist is chorus. Even if there are 5 people, like chamber group, they are not individuals. They are some part of collective. That's why I mentioned that collective is very important. So, drama, theater, Okay, how do I conceive these things? As I mentioned, I develop all elements simultaneously. So, for example, for my project, which I'm developing here, I already make some paintings because these are basis for visual elements. I already think how is going to be set design, how is going to be movement. So all elements are organically developed together. It's not only music and then, okay, now we know music. What can we do? Shall we put some blue light? No, because light, I understand not as a source for light to be seen, but as a message. So all elements are part of the score. Is that clear? Yeah, cool. So, ideas, what's first? Sometimes it's piece of music. Sometimes is some question which I channel, which I carry in myself, and I don't quite understand it. Usually these are questions which I don't understand, and as I have like 50 projects, I don't really understand much things in the world. But I like to do things which don't have only one direct meaning. So I like to have this open field for different interpretation and for different receptions. So it's very challenging to bring familiar things in new dress and in a new context and give audiences and performers as well a chance to interpret how they want, which is somehow a big freedom, but as well also big responsibility to have this chance to decide how to understand the piece, the project. So it seems exciting to allow these familiar materials on which Choregia is built the possibility to be discovered in new ways again and again, and give in new perspectives, in various levels and even various layers you can always find and always uncover. So, for example, here is one piece, just wait, Placebo, or Who Would Not Weep. This piece was based on very well-known work Stabat Mater by Pergolesi, Baroque composer, one of the most beautiful, beautiful pieces in the history. And it's based on medieval text about Mary who is crying under the cross when her son Jesus was crucified. So very well-known medieval text. What we did is we made new orchestrations, so we don't have a string orchestra, but we have one accordion and cello player, which is different acoustical environment, and we re-question actually Mother Mary more than situation of her suffering, below cross, we question Mother Mary as a social construct and as an instrument of supervision and control, or Mary as a symbolic construct in which femininity is confined within the limits of maternal, or Mother Mary as an object of imaginary love, as a substitute of suppressed male libido. So the Stabat Mater, which is so well known, was somehow a new dress. Please.
What is it to call? Some, on the one hand, some non-believers will say, well, you're just calling. That's mentioning a name, just calling, that's a call. Others will say, well, the fact that I call.
Well, I don't go to church on Sunday, don't get on my knees to pray, don't memorize the books of the Bible. I got my own special way. Well, I know Jesus loves me, maybe just a little bit more. I fall down on my knees every Sunday at Sir Elderly's candy store.
Another project which was quite interesting because it happened just in the moment of this Charlie Hebdo and all these interesting historical moments was Toxic Psalms, where we research again this collective operation, and especially what happened when collective gets infected with ideology. So through the research of Hannah Arendt and her observations in Jerusalem and similar experiments such as Milgram experiment and Lucifer effect and all kind of banality of evil, we brought a project which was actually somehow a reflection of Palestine, Syria, Pussy riots, and all these situations around the world, where religion is becoming the main reason of murderous violence in today's world. So it was kind of reflection of human brutality and men killing for the glory of their psalms. I never want to be agitator. We have to do something. I don't like this role, but again, the message was that we probably should not be hiding behind a big other. So that's Toxic Psalms. This was premiered in New York. That's American premiere. While this is running, music was very diverse, from Rachmaninoff to contemporary music from Nordic countries to some early music, even medieval polyphony. So it was very, let's say, eclectic musically.
So, I'll tell you everything. Now, say someone's one of us, but he's also, you know, you can tell, right? Right, you can tell. But sometimes you can't tell. You think someone's one of us, but then they got to him, and he wasn't anymore. And then we got to him, and he was one of us again, but still. He has to look like he isn't, that is, like he only looks like he is. But then they got wise to him, and now he isn't again. And he has to look like he isn't, or we'll get wise. And that's a triple.
Ditt fåt var vida du får.
Please continue.
Ai silapit katukkojen hudmieli. Naisenan kaurat paikkaluppilla lehikoisekin.
The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue.
Thank you. As I told you, I'm very interested in early music and, of course, in contemporary music. And I found it one interesting French medieval Gesamtkunstwerk, actually the first one in the history, Roman de Fauvel. The story is about a very ambitious horse who was very greedy and who has all these terrible characteristics, egotism, hedonism, hypocrisy, and all this kind of sin and corruption. And this Fauvel is his name. was the piece which was staged in Basel Opera, Basel Theater, and it was kind of transparent curtain. Behind, listener can follow events from this 14th century, but I think everybody was aware that it was not the right time of the action, because this Fauvel was serving kind of as a metaphor for actual political happening across Atlantic from European perspective. Fauvel.
Diese Gnade, Frau Kuhn, das ist nicht ohne tiefere Absichten. Sie hat mich zum großen Meister gemacht. Mich, Teufel!
Okay. So, I hope that you get a little bit of impression what choregia is, how deep love can be to the choirs, and this big love, and can be also very problematical love, because it's always a lot of people with different characters, with different, problems. So it's a very special work to work with these big groups, especially when you work on contemporary music, which is not easy to study, and early music is also difficult to memorize and to digest. But I think that when things are studied and done, then it gives really special experience, and I really like doing it. Thank you.